Julia flung the cookbook at my face, her eyes cold as a blade slicing through the air, and shouted with an arrogant smile, "This recipe is mine now." Those words left my entire body frozen. Before me was not just an old notebook, but a family treasure, steeped in the scent of spices, still bearing the greasy stains from the years my mother scribbled in our cramped New Orleans kitchen. For years, I cherished it like a piece of my soul, opening it whenever I wanted to recall my mother's frail hands stirring a pot of jambalaya. Yet now, my daughter-in-law, the one who once said she wanted to learn, who called me Chef Mama with admiring eyes, threw it all to the ground, dismissing the effort and love I poured into every page. I stood motionless in my familiar kitchen, the sound of the notebook hitting the floor like the shattering of my heart. Julia bent down, picked it up with her red-painted nails, as if holding a cheap commodity rather than a family legacy, and calmly declared with utmost arrogance, "It's mine now, all of it is mine." In that moment, I felt every fiber of my being tremble. It wasn't just the humiliation of betrayal, but the pain of watching my blood, my traditions, my memories stolen right before my eyes. For decades, I had lived and breathed those flavors, the sizzle of onions, celery, and bell peppers in the pan, the spicy aroma wafting through the streets of New Orleans. It wasn't just a recipe, it was history, it was motherhood, it was the legacy my mother left me, and I was to pass it on to my children. I wanted to lunge forward, snatch the notebook back, and clutch it to my chest like I was holding my very soul. But my feet were rooted, as if cemented to the cold tile floor. I looked at Julia with stunned eyes, and I realized, standing before me was no longer the sweet daughter-in-law who pretended to listen, but a greedy predator who had been scheming for a long time to take everything. The shock pierced my body like ice, but beneath it, a smoldering fire began to burn. I knew this moment would change everything. They thought I was old and frail, that I would silently accept it, but I knew this was only the beginning of a war. The next day, as I sat alone in my small kitchen, memories crashed over me like a raging wave. I closed my eyes and saw myself back in the glory days of New Orleans, where the whole city once whispered my name as a living legend. My restaurant, Clara's Creole Kitchen, was packed to the brim, with customers lining up around the corner to Bourbon Street just to taste my steaming jambalaya. That aroma once drifted through the narrow streets, mingling with the jazz from nearby bars, creating a symphony both wild and warm, quintessentially Southern. The press wrote about me more than once. I still remember the long article in the Times-Picayune, calling my jambalaya a dish that embraces the soul of New Orleans. I can still see the photo of me standing in the kitchen, wooden spoon in hand, hair tied up high, sweat beading on my forehead, but my eyes shining with joy. I had spent my life preserving that recipe, passed down from my mother, from my grandmother, women who poured their love into every grain of rice, every slice of andouille sausage, every plump red shrimp. Then my husband, Robert, passed away. His departure snuffed out the spotlight that once illuminated my life. I no longer had the strength to run a bustling restaurant with dozens of staff, the lively chatter, the constant orders. It all became a burden on my frail shoulders. I decided to leave the glitz behind, selling the restaurant to a trusted friend. But I couldn't abandon the kitchen. I chose another path. I bought an old truck, painted it bright yellow, and named it simply Mama Clara's Jambalaya. That little food truck became my new home. From then on, every morning, I drove to a familiar street corner, set up my handwritten sign, lit the fire, and cooked jambalaya. I didn't cook for big money, but to keep the family flavors alive. Regulars, workers, students, tourists stopped by, ordering a steaming portion of jambalaya, eating and chatting warmly. Some even said, "Mama Clara, your food beats any fancy restaurant." I'd smile, my heart warmed. That was the simple joy I needed. It was during that time that my son David brought Julia to meet me. I still remember that evening clearly. Julia arrived with her golden hair, bright blue eyes, a radiant smile, and a small camera slung around her neck. "I'm a food blogger," she introduced herself, her voice lively and confident. When David said, "This is my mom, who taught me everything about Southern cooking. Julia turned to me, her eyes sparkling. I admire you so much. I've read so many articles about you. I felt a pang in my heart. It had been so long since anyone mentioned my days as the queen of jambalaya. Hearing a young woman's praise softened my old heart like butter, melting in a hot pan. Julia looked at me with enthralled eyes. Chef Mama, can you teach me? I want to learn everything. Every step, every spice, every way to stir the pot to make the flavors come together perfectly. I laughed, pride swelling in me. For years, I hadn't expected to have a student. David never cared much for cooking, and I thought the recipe would die with me. Then Julia appeared, like a ray of light. I believed I was passing the torch to the next generation. I carefully taught her how to sauté onions, celery, and bell peppers to make the Cajun Holy Trinity, how to add rice to the simmering stock so it absorbed the flavors without getting mushy, how to taste and know when the jambalaya was perfect. Julia nodded eagerly, her eyes gleaming, sometimes scribbling notes quickly, always calling me Chef Mama with affection. Every time she said, "You're like a second mother to me," my heart surged with indescribable joy. I didn't just feel like a mother, but a teacher, a legacy bearer. In those admiring eyes, I thought my jambalaya, the precious family heritage, had found a worthy successor. I was wrong. In the days that followed, I continued letting Julia join me in the kitchen. At first, everything felt natural. She helped me chop onions, rinse rice, sometimes wash vegetables, or jot down what I told her. I didn't pay much attention, just happy to have someone sharing the kitchen space I'd always occupied alone. But then, I started noticing something off. Whenever I opened the old recipe notebook, Julia's eyes locked onto every page, like a thirsty person, spotting a drop of rain. She didn't just glance, she studied every word, every scribbled note from my mother's hand. Once, while I was busy stirring the jambalaya, I saw a flash of light from her phone. Julia was leaning down, snapping a quick photo of the page, listing the spice ratios. I froze and asked, "What are you taking a picture of?" She laughed, a bit awkwardly. "Oh, I just wanted to capture your beautiful handwriting, Chef Mama." I was skeptical, but let it go, telling myself she was young, a food blogger, probably just in the habit of photographing everything. But it happened again, multiple times. Whenever I pulled out the notebook, Julia found an excuse to hold her phone. She'd bombard me with tiny details. How much thyme do you add? A teaspoon, or half? How long do you toast the dried chilies? Why does the rice soak up the flavors so fast? At first, I was proud of her interest, but gradually, the way she stared at me, switching questions rapidly, then laughing to change the subject when I turned around, stirred a vague suspicion in me. One afternoon, I stepped out to buy more vegetables. When I returned, I heard the hum of the photocopier from my small office, where I kept the cookbook in a drawer. My heart lurched. I hurried in and caught Julia, her hands trembling as she pulled out warm sheets of paper, clearly copies of my handwritten jambalaya recipe, my mother's words, the familiar smudged ink. She jumped, eyes wide, then gave an awkward laugh. "Chef Mama, don't misunderstand. I just wanted a copy to study when you're not around." I stood silent, staring at her. A dozen questions raced through my mind. Why do it secretly? Why not ask permission? Why copy instead of taking notes by hand? I wanted to yell, to snatch the papers and tear them apart. But looking at her youthful face, those bright eyes that seemed eager to learn, I softened. I remembered the warmth of her first Chef Mama, the comfort it brought after years alone in the kitchen. I reassured myself, maybe she's just too eager to learn. Maybe she truly wants to preserve this legacy. I let it go, saying nothing more. Julia sighed in relief, gathered the papers, and babbled an explanation before tucking them away. I nodded, pretending to believe her. But deep down, a seed of doubt had taken root. I knew I'd ignored a warning sign, but I never imagined that moment of weakness would pave the way for the nightmare to come. That night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep. The image of Julia secretly copying those pages played vividly in my mind. I pressed my hand to my chest, my heart pounding with both worry and disappointment. I wondered, had I been too trusting? Was this passing the torch just a trap? I tried to push away the dark thoughts, telling myself, "No, Clara, don't be paranoid. Julia just wants to learn, to honor the family recipe." But no matter how I reassured myself, unease kept tapping in my chest, like the steady beat of a heart warning of an approaching storm. That morning, I sat in my little food truck, holding a cup of black coffee, skimming the local paper I bought daily. My routine: sip coffee, read some news, then fire up the stove for my regular's jambalaya. But that morning, a bold headline hit me like a punch. Southern Flame announces partnership with young culinary star Julia Brooks, creator of exclusive jambalaya recipe. I froze. My hands shook, the paper falling to the truck's floor with a dry rustle. I leaned down, heart racing, and read every line. The article was full of praise. Julia, the talented food blogger, had created a unique, unprecedented jambalaya, now exclusively distributed by the Southern Flame restaurant chain across Louisiana. Below was a photo that made my blood run cold. Julia in a pristine white chef's coat, Chef Julia Brooks, embroidered on it, her face beaming with pride, eyes gleaming. Behind her was a massive banner, "Original recipe by Julia Brooks." I sank into the chair, my chest tight. It wasn't a new recipe. It was my jambalaya, my mother's, the Mitchell family's passed down for generations. I recognized every detail: the blend of andouille sausage and fresh shrimp, the precise ratio of celery, bell peppers, and onions for the perfect holy trinity, even the pinch of toasted thyme added before stirring it into the pot, a detail only in my notebook, which I'd taught Julia with all my heart. She hadn't created anything, she had stolen it. My eyes blurred, my throat bitter. In my head, Julia's voice echoed from that day. "Chef Mama, teach me every detail. I want to preserve this legacy." And now, before the whole city, she'd stolen it, daring to claim, "This recipe is mine." I dropped the paper, rushed into the food truck, and rummaged through my old computer and email. I remembered I'd never signed anything, never agreed to let Julia use the recipe, but a gnawing fear pushed me to check. And as I dreaded, in my inbox was a new folder labeled "Agreement, Clara Mitchell, to Julia Brooks." I opened it, my heart nearly bursting. It was an email sent to a Southern Flame representative, with a PDF contract attached. It stated, "I, Clara Mitchell, agree to transfer my family jambalaya recipe to Julia Brooks, the worthy successor." Signed, Clara Mitchell. Below was a scanned signature, looking exactly like mine, with a characteristic shaky C. I went rigid. I knew I'd never written those words, never signed such a document, but the forger was cunning enough to use a scanned copy of my signature, likely taken from bank paperwork or an insurance form. My body went cold, my hands trembling as they touched the screen, as if I could pierce through the deception. Fear and unprecedented rage surged within me. Julia hadn't just stolen the recipe. She'd forged my identity, using my own name to legitimize her despicable act. She'd made me a fool who willingly handed over my family's treasure. I closed my eyes tightly, memories flooding back like a knife, twisting in my heart. I remembered Julia's first step into my kitchen, her radiant eyes calling me Chef Mama. I remembered my pride letting her stand by the stove, sharing secrets even David, my son, didn't know. I remembered seeing her as a daughter, trusting her enough to place the cookbook in her hands. And now, I realized it was all a performance, a meticulously calculated plan to steal the most precious thing in my life. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my flesh until they drew blood. No, I couldn't sit idly by and watch her bask in the spotlight, receiving praise for my sweat and tears. I couldn't let Original Recipe by Julia Brooks erase the legacy my mother and I had spent our lives preserving. In that moment of excruciating pain, something ignited in me, a fierce clarity I'd buried under years of kindness and endurance. I looked at the notebook on the kitchen shelf, its yellowed pages still carrying the faint scent of sautéed onions and dried chilies. I swore to myself, "No, Julia, this isn't the end. You may fool the world, but you can't fool the one who gave you that recipe. I'll show you that justice has a flavor too, and it's spicier, more searing, than any jambalaya. I snapped the laptop shut, wiping my tears. The rage in my heart had turned to iron resolve. I knew this war had begun, and I, Clara Mitchell, the 71-year-old woman Julia thought was old and weak, would not let her steal my family's soul without paying a price. I couldn't take it anymore. Holding the newspaper, I marched to David's house. I didn't knock gently as usual, but pounded the door until it shook. Julia opened it, her lips curled in that fake smile, as if nothing had happened. "Oh, Chef Mama's here to visit? What a surprise," she said, her voice sweeter than cane syrup, but her eyes glinted with triumph. I thrust the paper in her face. "Explain this, Julia. This is my recipe. Why is your name on it?" Julia flinched briefly, but quickly regained her composure, shrugging coldly. "You're mistaken. That recipe is mine now. You just cook out of habit, but I'm the one who knows how to make it a brand. You're old, Clara. Your time is over." Her words made my whole body tremble, like a knife plunging into my heart. But what hurt more was when I turned to my son. David sat in his chair, avoiding my gaze. I waited for him to object, to stand up for his mother, but instead, his voice was soft and shaky. "Mom, think about mine and Julia's future. This is a big opportunity. Southern Flame isn't some small chain. If Julia succeeds, we'll have a stable life. No more worrying about money." I froze. I wanted to scream, "What about me? What about my honor? What about the recipe your grandmother left behind?" But the words stuck in my throat. In David's eyes, I was no longer the mother who raised him, but an obstacle to his and his wife's ambitious future. "You know where that recipe came from," I said sharply, staring at him. "It's the blood and sweat of me and your grandmother. How can you stay silent while someone steals it?" David winced, his hands gripping his pants like a scared child, but then he let go, sighing. "Mom, sometimes you have to let go. Your generation is done. Julia is the future. I'm begging you, don't stand in the way." Julia stood beside him, arms crossed, lips curling in defiance. "He's right, Clara. You had your time. Now it's my turn to shine. Your recipe will reach thousands of diners. Don't be selfish." Clinging to it in that run-down food truck, I turned away, my eyes burning. Not only had my recipe been stolen, but I'd lost my only son, the one I thought would carry on the love for our food, who instead sided with the betrayer. The pain was unmatched. I'd lost my husband, my restaurant, and now, my son. I stepped back, touching the doorframe to keep from collapsing. In my ears, Julia's voice rang out, each word deliberate. "You should be grateful. I'm keeping the name Jambalaya in the spotlight. Without me, no one would remember you anymore." I turned back, my gaze icy. "You can steal the recipe, you can bribe others to believe you, but you'll never have its soul. And that soul is still here, in me." With that, I walked out, not looking back. Behind me, I heard David's faint call, "Mom," but his voice was so weak it meant nothing. I knew which side he'd chosen. The sky was gray that afternoon. I drove my old food truck home, hands gripping the wheel until my knuckles turned white. A storm churned inside me, pain, humiliation, and rage. I'd raised David with every penny earned from Jambalaya, sent him to school, helped him build a life. Yet now, when I needed him to defend me, he stayed silent, turned his back, and called betrayal the future. That night, I sat in my dark kitchen, the cookbook before me, its yellowed pages trembling under the lamplight. I placed my hand on it, swearing to myself, if they want to use this recipe as a stepping stone for fame, they'll pay a price. Not just for me, but for the generations who pass down this flame. I won't let them bury my family's legacy. That night, I couldn't sleep. After leaving David's house, I drove my food truck straight to its usual spot, my second home for years. I didn't turn on the cabin light, just sat there, clutching the wheel, staring into the dark void. The cicadas chirped outside, but inside the truck, the silence was suffocating. Finally, I lit the gas stove. The blue flame flared up, and I set my old cast iron pot on it, pouring in oil, sautéing onions, celery, and bell peppers. The familiar scent of the Holy Trinity filled the air, stirring memories. I heard the sizzle of the pan, like my mother's voice years ago. "Clara, You have to sauté until the vegetables turn pale gold. That's when the flavor's complete. Tears welled up, unstoppable this time, but I didn't let them fall. I stirred the simmering jambalaya, watching the steam rise like a mirror, reflecting both past and present. I saw Robert, my husband, sitting in our old restaurant, smiling as I bustled in the hot kitchen. I saw young David, his mouth messy but praising, "Mom, you cook the best in the world." It all flooded back in an instant, then faded, leaving a bitter truth. Now my son had chosen to stand with the betrayer. I muttered to myself, my voice low and hoarse in the cramped space. If I stay silent, I'll vanish along with the recipe. I'll waste away, and the legacy of my mother, my grandmother, my entire family will be buried under the name Julia Brooks. The words echoed, like a sworn curse. Outside, darkness enveloped everything, with only the faint glow of streetlights filtering through. I sat in front of the jambalaya pot, listening to its simmering boil, the spicy aroma hitting my senses, making me more alert than ever. I realized that from this moment, I could no longer afford to be weak. I had cried too much, for the husband I lost, for the son who turned his back, for the memories betrayed, but tears couldn't save me or reclaim justice. I wiped my tears, inhaling the familiar scent deeply. The fire in the pot fueled the fire in my heart, a flame of determination, of clarity. No more tears, Clara, I told myself. From now on, only fighting. I looked around the food truck, the neatly arranged spice jars, the worn-out knife, the old cookbook still resting on the shelf. These weren't just objects. They were weapons, witnesses. They would protect me if I knew how to use them. In my mind, I began sketching the first steps. I needed evidence. I had to prove Julia stole the recipe, forged my signature. I couldn't just scream in her face, because the world would believe the image of the young culinary star, not an old woman driving a food truck. I had to make the truth ring out, clear and undeniable. Sitting by the jambalaya pot, I wrote in a small notebook, recording, evidence, lawyer, press. I underlined each word, my heart pounding but steady. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone, because the truth was on my side. When the jambalaya was done, I scooped a small spoonful, tasting it. The spicy, salty, sweet flavors blended perfectly, rich like life itself. I closed my eyes and smiled. This was a flavor no one could steal, because it lived in my memories, in my soul. Julia could steal the written recipe, but she could never take the fire in my heart. Dawn streamed through the food truck's small window. I sat there, my eyes no longer misty with tears, but blazing with determination. I stood, cleaned the pots, turned off the stove, and whispered as if commanding myself, "This war has just begun, and I, Clara Mitchell, will be the one to end it." I started acting the next morning. The long night had given me enough time to grieve, to cry, and finally, to turn it all into cold determination. I drove the food truck to a small electronics store on the corner and bought a pocket-sized recording device. The clerk asked what I needed it for, and I just smiled. To keep memories. In my mind, I thought, these memories aren't for reminiscing, they're for evidence, to expose betrayal. I chose a discreet spot in the kitchen, on the spice shelf, behind the jar of nutmeg. Julia never noticed. From there, the tiny recorder could capture every conversation in my kitchen. Whenever Julia came to help, I pretended to be busy preparing ingredients, but I was watching her every move, every glance. That afternoon, Julia walked in as usual, with a bright smile. "Chef Mama, shall we cook a batch of jambalaya today? I want to film a video for my channel." I nodded, giving a faint smile. Inside, my heart raced with both nerves and anticipation. While I stirred the pot, I saw Julia pull out her phone and walk to the back of the kitchen. I pretended to focus on chopping onions, but my ears strained to catch every word. And then, what I'd been waiting for came. Julia's voice rang out, sweet but dripping with triumph. "Yeah, I did it. The old lady doesn't suspect a thing. I stole the recipe successfully. Southern Flame totally bought that I'm the creator. They're gearing up for a nationwide campaign. I'm about to be a star." My hand froze, the knife hovering over the cutting board. Her words cut into my heart like a blade, but but I forced myself to stay calm. The recorder was running, and every confession would be preserved. But she didn't stop there. Julia continued, her voice lowering with a sneer. The signature? I forged her signature for the contract. Easy. I got a copy of her old signature from some insurance papers David brought home. Piece of cake. She had no idea. The contract's done. Southern Flame paid the deposit. Let's see what she can do now. My blood surged, my hands trembling. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Julia didn't just steal the recipe. She forged my identity, dragging my son into this filthy scheme. David had given her the documents to fake my signature. I turned away so Julia wouldn't see my reddening eyes. I busied myself with the jambalaya pot, but my heart twisted. Inside, pain and anger swirled. Yet strangely, I didn't feel broken anymore. I felt a spark ignite, a fire for justice. I knew I had a weapon now. When Julia left, I rushed to retrieve the recorder, my hands shaking as I pressed play. Julia's voice echoed in the small kitchen. I stole the recipe successfully. I forged her signature for the contract. Each word was like a hammer blow, but also a gleaming sword in my hand. I sat down, placing the recorder on the table, closing my eyes. Tears welled up, but not from sorrow. This time, they fell from relief, because for the first time in these dark days, I saw hope. I opened my eyes, my hands still trembling, but my gaze had changed. In the small mirror on the kitchen wall, I saw a silver-haired woman with tired eyes, but deep within them burned unwavering resolve. I smiled, a rare smile. After so many days, Julia, you've tied the noose around your own neck. You've handed me what will bring you down. I carefully stored the recorder in a locked metal box, writing on a piece of paper. Date, time, content, confession of stealing recipe, forging signature. I knew every detail mattered in this war. I was no longer a passive old woman. I had become a gatherer of evidence. That night, I didn't cook. I brewed a pot of tea, sat quietly in the food truck, and listened to the recording over and over. Each time, the pain sank deeper, but my resolve grew stronger. I knew the battle wouldn't be easy. Julia was cunning, and she had David behind her. But now I had the truth, and the truth was my strongest ally. Outside, night fell, but a new light blazed within me. I whispered to myself, the day Julia stands on stage, basking in false glory, will be the day she falls before justice, and I will be the one to pull back the curtain of her deceit. The next morning, I wore my old but neat green dress, combed my hair tidy, and headed into downtown New Orleans. I went to the office of Mr. Harris, the name chefs and restaurateurs mentioned when talking about recipe copyrights. They called Harris the old fox of the culinary world, having helped many chefs reclaim their honor in recipe theft cases. I stepped into the red brick building, my heart both nervous and hopeful. Harris's office was simple, not overly luxurious but cozy, filled with shelves of thick books on copyright law, commercial law, and photos of him with famous chefs. He greeted me with a firm handshake, his eyes sharp and calm. Miss Mitchell, I've heard of you. How can I help you today? I sat down, pulling the recorder from my bag and placing it on the table like a treasure. Listen to this, and you'll understand. I pressed play and the room filled with Julia's clear voice. The old lady doesn't suspect a thing. I stole the recipe successfully. I forged her signature for the contract. Harris didn't blink, only nodded, pausing when the recording ended. He raised an eyebrow, his voice low. Very strong evidence. If what you say about the forged email is true, we have a solid case. He paused, then his eyes grew serious. But you need to prepare yourself. Julia will fight back, and she'll fight dirty. Ambitious people don't let go easily. I clenched my hands, my heart pounding. I'm ready. They've taken everything. I have nothing left to lose but my honor and my mother's recipe. Harris looked at me for a long moment, then sighed softly. I believe you, but here's the thing. Julia's one step ahead. I just checked the copyright registry. She filed for a copyright on the jambalaya recipe 3 weeks ago. In her filing, she claims to be the creator and included a sworn statement that you, Clara Mitchell, are confused due to old age, even showing signs of memory loss. I froze, my ears ringing. blood rushing to my face. What? She dared say I'm losing my mind? Harris nodded, his voice calm but heavy. In the filing, Julia wrote that you confuse recipes you created with ones you read elsewhere. She claims you often forget, miswrite ratios, and that you willingly gave her the recipe because you're no longer lucid enough to manage it. I gripped the chair tightly, overwhelmed by uncontrollable rage. I'd endured plenty of insults in my life, but never had anyone called me senile. I still drove, cooked for dozens of customers daily, remembered every recipe and trick by heart. I was a chef, a keeper of the flame, not a confused old woman as she painted me. My voice choked but burned with fire. No, Mr. Harris, this isn't just about the recipe anymore. This is about my honor, my lucidity. She's trying to turn me into a madwoman, to steal what I've preserved my whole life. Harris nodded, his eyes sharp. Exactly. This isn't just a copyright battle. It's a battle for your dignity. If we let Julia's story stand, the court might believe it. Society is quick to believe an old woman past 70 is confused rather than a young woman capable of such deceit. You need solid evidence, proof of your lucidity, your ability to manage, the recipe's history. I took a deep breath and nodded. I'll do everything. Tell me what to do, and I'll do it. Harris gave a small smile. Not casual, but that of someone ready for battle. First, we'll gather all documents proving this recipe has been in your family for decades. Articles, photos, certifications. Second, we'll find a culinary expert to analyze the recipe, proving its unique markers. Third, we'll collect witnesses. People who've eaten your jambalaya, who know it's distinctly yours. And finally, we'll counter the memory loss claim. You need a doctor's visit, a medical evaluation to prove you're fully lucid. Hearing each step, I felt both weighed down and enlightened. The road ahead would be thorny, but at least I had a plan. I was no longer the woman crying over a pot of jambalaya. I had allies, and I had a goal. I stood, shaking Harris's hand again. Thank you. I've spent my life preparing to cook. Now I'll prepare to fight. Harris looked at me, nodding firmly. And this time, we'll cook a dish of justice, spicy, hot, too much for the betrayer to swallow. I stepped out of the office, the midday sun hitting my face. The pain in my heart hadn't eased, but it was replaced by iron resolve. Julia didn't just want to steal the recipe, she wanted to bury my honor and memory, and I swore I wouldn't let that happen. I hadn't even recovered from the meeting with Harris when the media whirlwind swept me up. In just a few days, Julia Brooks's name flooded every outlet, from prestigious food magazines to small blogs. They called her grandiose titles, the new culinary star of the South, the young woman bringing jambalaya to the modern world. On TV, Julia appeared in a pristine white chef's coat, eyes gleaming, smile radiant, talking about her journey creating the dish that changed her life. Each word she spoke was a knife to my heart. She spoke fluently, confidently, as if she truly were the recipe's creator. The host gushed. It's incredible that a young woman like you created such a traditional yet modern flavor. I sat in the food truck, eyes glued to the screen, fingers trembling as I turned down the volume. I couldn't bear her deceitful tone for another second. But the most painful part was when the media started mentioning me. In a social media comment, someone called me a jealous old woman, bitter about being outdone by the younger generation. Another article even wrote, "Rumor has it that Clara Mitchell, a retired chef, is fabricating stories to undermine Julia." At 71, with a faltering memory, Clara may have forgotten where she got the recipe. Reading those lines, I felt like I was being pushed into an abyss. They didn't just steal my recipe, they wanted to steal my honor and lucidity, but I didn't collapse. I remembered Harris's words, "You need evidence, solid, clear." So I began my own quest to gather it. I dug through old cardboard boxes in the attic, full of a lifetime's keepsakes. I found photos of me in the restaurant kitchen years ago, wearing an apron, sweat-soaked but smiling brightly as I held a steaming pot of jambalaya. I pulled out yellowed newspapers with bold headlines, "Clara Mitchell and the Jambalaya," that captivated the city. I also kept certificates from cooking competitions, where judges noted Clara Mitchell's heirloom jambalaya recipe unique and distinct. I organized them neatly into a file and brought it to Harris. He looked through each page, nodding. Excellent. This will be the foundation to prove the recipe has been in your family for decades. Most crucial was the cookbook. I opened it under the yellow lamplight, my fingers trembling as they traced the pages, the grease stains, the faded ink. The notes I wrote in 1975, all were like a fingerprint of time, undeniable. I photographed each page, scanned them carefully, and gave copies to Harris. No modern copy could mimic these marks of time, he said. This will be our strongest witness. While I tirelessly gathered evidence, the storm outside raged on. Julia appeared at every event, every talk show, discussing her creative journey. She told a touching story. I remember the first time I cooked jambalaya. I cried because I felt like I found myself. The audience applauded wildly, and I, the one who taught her every step, was erased from the picture. I realized this war wasn't just in court, it was a war of public opinion. One night, as I sat in the food truck reviewing my evidence, my phone buzzed. A new email appeared from an unfamiliar address, cheftruth@noreply.com. My heart raced. I opened it, finding just a few lines. I have proof Julia cheated. You're not alone. Reply if you want to know more. I sat stunned, eyes locked on the screen. Who could this be? Someone from Southern Flame? A blogger who worked with Julia? Or someone in her team fed up with her lies? I didn't know, but I knew those words were a ray of light, piercing the darkness surrounding me. I leaned back in the chair, clutching the phone. Not alone. Those two words echoed in my heart. For so long, I felt like a lonely old woman fighting a world that worshipped Julia. But now, someone out there saw the truth. Someone was ready to offer the missing piece I needed. I smiled for the first time in days. The battle still favored Julia. The media still hailed her. And I was seen as a bitter old woman. But I had evidence, a lawyer, and now, possibly a secret ally. And as Harris said, the truth never stays silent for long. I tapped the table, whispering like a vow. Julia, you think you've won, but you don't realize. The people you trust will be the ones to expose you. And I, Clara Mitchell, will patiently wait for that moment. I knew Julia would hold her official launch with Southern Flame at the end of the week. The news was everywhere. Event to unveil the South's new culinary star, Julia Brooks. They called it a lavish gala, attended by critics, media, and big names in the culinary world, held at a glittering hotel in downtown New Orleans, its ballroom adorned with golden lights. I sat in the food truck, staring at the invitation Harris had gotten for me. It read, "Launch of the exclusive menu, Jambalaya by Julia Brooks." I gripped the paper, my fingers trembling with anger. This was where Julia would proudly don the halo built on lies, but I wouldn't let her rest easy. I had evidence, and that night, amidst hundreds of flashing cameras, I would make my appearance. The evening arrived, and the hotel was packed. Men in suits, women in dazzling dresses, filled the ballroom. Reporters snapped photos, flashes flickering endlessly. A jazz band played soft background music, champagne glasses clinking under crystal chandeliers. Everything was staged to celebrate Julia, the star of the night. When Julia stepped onto the stage, the room erupted in applause. She wore a white chef's coat, Chef Julia Brooks, embroidered in shimmering thread. On the large screen behind her, bold text declared, "Original recipe by Julia Brooks." My stomach churned. Julia raised the microphone, her voice clear and brimming with confidence. Cuisine, ladies and gentlemen, is creation. Cooking isn't just food. It's breathing soul into every grain of rice, every drop of stock. I, Julia Brooks, spent my youth creating a new jambalaya, one that honors tradition while embracing modernity. And today, with Southern Flame's trust, my recipe will reach millions of diners. This isn't just my success. It's proof that the younger generation can renew what seems old and outdated. The applause thundered. Some reporters stood, snapping photos, cheering. Julia smiled, raising a sparkling champagne glass. I knew this was her moment of ultimate confidence, when she thought the world was in her grasp, and it was also the moment she was most vulnerable to falling. As Julia continued, Let's raise a glass to a new era of jambalaya cuisine. The ballroom doors swung open. I stepped in, wearing my simple green dress, silver hair neatly tied back. All eyes turned to me. A few reporters froze, then raised their cameras. Whispers spread through the room. Clara Mitchell. Isn't that the legendary chef from years ago? I walked slowly down the aisle, my shoes tapping on the wooden floor. No one stopped me. The air was thick with tension, like a guitar string stretched too tight. Julia, on stage, stiffened, her smile faltering mid-sentence. Her eyes met mine, one cold, the other flustered. I stopped in the center of the flashing lights, my voice not loud but clear enough for the entire room to hear. Cuisine is indeed about creation, Julia, but it's also about honesty, and the recipe you're claiming as your own doesn't belong to you. Murmurs erupted. Some reporters frantically snapped photos, recording the scene. Julia forced a smile, trying to regain her composure. Chef Mama, you're here? What a surprise. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Clara Mitchell, a retired chef I deeply respect, but please, don't misunderstand. Tonight is about celebrating the new generation, not revisiting the past. I took a few more steps, my eyes locked on Julia. The new generation. Is that what you call stealing a recipe, forging a signature, and spreading lies that I'm senile? The room exploded. Camera shutters clicked, gasps echoed, and conversations buzzed. Julia paled, stammering, what are you talking about? This is slander. I didn't respond. I raised my hand, signaling. Harris, who had been quietly following me, stepped forward from the back of the room, carrying a small laptop. As the large screen behind Julia went dark, a recording played, her voice clear and cold. The old lady doesn't suspect a thing. I stole the recipe successfully. I forged her signature for the contract. The sound reverberated through the silent ballroom. Julia stood frozen, her face ashen. A few reporters exchanged glances, eyes wide with shock. The Southern Flame representative, a middle-aged man in a suit, stood abruptly, his face grim. Julia, panicked, shouted, "This is fabricated. It's edited. She's old. She's delusional." But her voice trembled, losing all conviction. I stepped onto the stage, looking straight into her eyes, my voice calm but cutting. "Julia, you revealed the truth yourself, and tonight, before the press, the restaurant, and everyone here, that truth can't be hidden." In that moment, I no longer felt like the lonely old woman driving a food truck. I was Clara Mitchell, the keeper of my family's legacy, who had spent a lifetime protecting the flavor of jambalaya, and I knew the battle had shifted. The air in the room was still taut as a wire, but I had placed my finger on the first note, ready to play the chord of justice. Julia tried to maintain her smile, though her face was cracking. She raised her champagne glass, her voice shaky, but attempting nonchalance. "Ladies and gentlemen, don't be distracted. This is my night, Southern Flame's night, a new era of cuisine. Let's raise a glass." But a familiar beep from the speakers drowned her out. Harris played the recording again, louder this time, each word sharp as a blade. "The old lady doesn't suspect a thing. I stole the recipe successfully. I forged her signature for the contract." The sound echoed through the room, reaching every ear, piercing every gaze. The ballroom fell so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Reporters scrambled to record, cameras flashing relentlessly. Julia froze, her hand trembling, champagne spilling over the glass's rim. Her face went from pale to flushed, her lips quivering. This is edited, a conspiracy. She's delusional. Everyone." I took a deep breath and stepped closer to the stage. Each step was clear, resolute. I didn't need to shout or rage. I only needed the truth, and the truth was now my greatest weapon. I opened my bag, pulled out the weathered cookbook, and held it high for all to see. The ballroom lights reflected off its worn leather cover, frayed edges, and yellowed pages. I spoke, my voice low but resonant. "This is my family's legacy. The cookbook my mother left me from the 1960s. Every page bears grease stains, the scent of spices, and my handwriting. You can see it here." I flipped to a page, holding it up for the cameras to project onto the large screen. The room gasped. The screen showed handwritten text and faded blue ink. Jambalaya recipe, perfected 1975. Below was my signature, with the characteristic shaky C from my early days signing official documents. I turned to Julia, my gaze icy. You say I'm senile? Then explain this cookbook. Written decades before you were even born. Julia's mouth opened, but no words came out. She turned to the Southern Flame representative, forcing a weak smile. It's obviously fake. It has to be. The representative, Mr. Henderson, his face dark, stepped forward. Julia, what we just heard, and what Miss Mitchell just presented, cannot be ignored. We demand a clear explanation. Julia stammered, her confidence gone. No, this is a trap. She's jealous because of her age. The recipe, I developed it. I created. I cut her off. My voice firm. You might have added a sprig of parsley, a pinch of salt, but the backbone of this recipe, every unique detail, is mine, and you know it, Julia. A female reporter stood, raising her microphone. Julia, do you deny that the voice in the recording is yours? Julia fell silent. The room held its breath. Hundreds of eyes focused on her. That silent response was louder than any confession. I took another step, handing the cookbook to Harris. He held it up for the cameras to capture clearly. Ladies and gentlemen, I continued, a dish isn't just a recipe, it's memory, tradition, soul. I don't need the spotlight. I just need the truth to be respected. And the truth is, Julia Brooks stole it. The crowd erupted. Reporters rushed toward me, microphones raised, cameras flashing. Julia tried to interrupt, shouting, "She's making it up. I'm the creator." But her voice drowned in the chaos. The ballroom was no longer Julia's stage. It had become a public courtroom, where the truth had just been unveiled. Julia looked around, her eyes frantic for support, but even David, my son sitting in the back row, didn't dare step forward. He hung his head, avoiding my gaze. I took a deep breath, shaking my head slightly. Not only the recipe, but also the bond of motherhood had shattered in that moment. But at least I had reclaimed something greater. Justice. I closed the cookbook, my voice steady, loud enough for the room to hear. People can steal fame, they can forge signatures, but time and truth can never be stolen. And tonight, the truth has spoken. The room exploded. Flashes, cheers, the hum of cameras. Julia stumbled back, one step, then two, her face pale, and I, standing in the blinding light, knew the battle had entered a new phase, and this time, the scales had tipped in my favor. The room hadn't calmed down after I held up the cookbook when Harris stepped onto the stage. He adjusted his glasses, his voice calm but resolute, booming through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, what you just heard isn't just Julia Brooks's confession, but undeniable digital evidence. Allow me to present. He opened his laptop, connecting it to the large screen. An email chain appeared, one titled Agreement, Clara Mitchell to Julia Brooks. Harris pointed to it, his words striking like hammer blows. This is the email Julia sent to Southern Flame, with a contract stating my client, Miss Clara Mitchell, agreed to transfer the jambalaya recipe, but we consulted a data analysis expert. Please welcome Dr. Lee. A slim Asian man with glasses stepped forward. He plugged a USB into the laptop and spoke. Ladies and gentlemen, I analyzed the metadata of the PDF file sent. The results show it was created on a personal computer registered to Julia Brooks. The IP address of the email also traces back to Julia's home, not Miss Mitchell's. Furthermore, the signature in the file was pasted from an old scan, with no legitimate digital signing process. The room gasped. Reporters scribbled furiously, snapping photos of the screen. Julia, pale, stammered, "No, he's lying. Metadata can be faked." Harris smiled calmly. If metadata can be faked, then explain why the device ID numbers perfectly match a laptop registered under Julia Brooks's name for warranty. We have documentation from the manufacturer. Julia froze, her mouth open but silent. I looked down, seeing VIP guests shaking their heads, their skeptical looks turning to contempt. Harris continued, "But it doesn't end there. Please hear from a culinary expert." An older woman with a composed demeanor stepped up, wearing a white blouse, her name tag reading, Dr. Martha Green, American Culinary Institute. She scanned the room and spoke slowly. I've studied Miss Mitchell's jambalaya recipe since 1975. Through her original cookbook, there are unique elements no one else has used. First, toasting thyme and dried chilies before adding them to the pot, a rare technique creating a subtle smoky flavor distinctive to her jambalaya. Second, the Holy Trinity ratio, onions, celery, bell peppers, at a precise 3:2:2, unlike the common 1:1:1. Third, I compared it to the recipe Julia submitted for copyright. Every detail matches exactly. This cannot be called accidental creation. This is deliberate copying. The crowd gasped again. A reporter stood, shouting, "Are you certain?" Dr. Green nodded. "I call it a culinary fingerprint, like a human fingerprint. Each chef's recipe has unique markers that can't be duplicated. Clara Mitchell's jambalaya is just that." Julia Brooks took that fingerprint and claimed it as her own. The murmurs grew louder. Reporters jostled to record, cameras zooming in on Julia's pale, trembling face. She tried to argue. "No, I was inspired. I added my own touches." Pedersen, Southern Flame's representative, had lost patience. He stepped forward, his voice firm. "Enough, Julia. We cannot work with a plagiarist and fraud. Southern Flame officially terminates our contract with you, effective immediately." Julia stood stunned. "No, you can't. You need me. I did so much for this event." Henderson's face was stern. "No, you needed us, and we need honesty, something you never had." He turned to me, bowing slightly. "Miss Mitchell, on behalf of Southern Flame, I apologize for allowing that disgraceful contract to exist. We ask for your forgiveness for our negligence." The room applauded. Flashes went wild. I stood there, my eyes stinging but lips pressed tight, maintaining composure. A strange feeling surged within me, relief mixed with sorrow. Justice had won, but the betrayal from my son and daughter-in-law left a wound that would never heal. Julia burst into tears, screaming, grabbing the microphone. "No, it's a conspiracy. She tricked everyone. I'm the one who made this recipe famous." But her voice was lost in the uproar. Reporters no longer recorded her excuses, focusing instead on capturing the moment a star fell. Images of Julia, mascara streaking down her cheeks, dress crumpled from tears, would soon flood headlines with bitter captions. Harris placed a hand on my shoulder, whispering, "We've reached a turning point, but the legal battle continues. Tonight was just the beginning." I nodded, watching Julia collapse into a chair, sobbing. One thought echoed in my mind. You could steal the recipe, Julia, but you couldn't steal the truth. As the hotel ballroom lights dimmed, I knew the first public battle was over, but its aftershocks rippled far beyond any applause or clamor. Within hours, social media exploded with images of Julia crumpled on stage, mascara smeared, mouth open in a desperate wail. The recording was shared thousands of times, with scathing captions. "Food thief, systematic plagiarist, from culinary star to recipe thief." On Twitter, #FoodThiefJulia trended overnight. A famous food blogger wrote, "Nothing's worse than stealing someone's work and calling it creativity." Julia Brooks buried her own career. On Instagram, mocking memes flooded in pictures of Julia holding a jambalaya spoon, captioned "Stolen Recipe Special." I read it all with mixed feelings. Part of me felt vindicated that the truth was out, but another part ached. None of this should have happened if Julia had chosen honesty over greed. David came to me the next day. He stood outside the food truck, face gaunt, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the ground. I stepped out, looking at him, my heart softening. After all, he was still my only son, the one I raised. "Mom." His voice was hoarse. "I'm sorry. I didn't think it would go this far. I thought Julia just wanted a chance." I looked into his eyes, the same eyes that once lit up when he called me the best mom in the world. Now, they held only regret and shame. I replied softly, but coldly, "A chance doesn't come through betrayal. You knew that." David reached to touch my shoulder, but I stepped back. "I couldn't. Not now." He choked out, "Mom, Please forgive me. I was wrong to stay silent, to side with Julia. I'm truly sorry. I turned away, my heart aching, but resolute. Forgiveness will come someday, David, but not today. Today, I need to hold on to myself. I walked back into the food truck, leaving David alone in the glaring sunlight. As I tried to stay calm, more news hit. Reports announced economic police had opened an investigation into Julia Brooks's commercial fraud, the forged contract, fake signature, and the deposit Southern Flame paid, all became evidence. A reporter called me, asking, "Miss Mitchell, did you know Julia's bank accounts were frozen this morning?" I froze for a moment. "Frozen?" I repeated. The reporter confirmed, "Yes, by court order for the investigation. All of Julia Brooks's accounts are locked. She can't withdraw, transfer, or spend a dime." I sat in the food truck, my hands trembling on my chest. I hadn't expected things to move so fast. Julia, who once gloated over stealing my recipe, now faced a future with nothing, possibly even criminal charges. Outside, a few regulars knocked on the truck's door. They smiled, calling Mama Clara, "We want your jambalaya, the real jambalaya." I served them steaming portions, the aroma rising thickly. Seeing their satisfied smiles, I knew the recipe and my honor had returned to its rightful place. A voice echoed in my heart. The war isn't over, but Julia dug her own grave, and this time, justice will see it through. On the day of the trial, New Orleans' sky was heavy with gray. Headlines screamed, "The Jambalaya Trial of the Century, Clara Mitchell versus daughter-in-law Julia Brooks." They called me the culinary matriarch, Julia the fading star, turning the trial into a national spectacle. I read those words, trembling yet ignited with fire. Today, not just the recipe but my honor, memory, and lucidity would be judged. Stepping out of the food truck, I faced a line of reporters waiting. Dozens of lenses zoomed in, flashes blinding. "Miss Mitchell, do you believe you'll win? Are you really the creator of the jambalaya recipe?" Questions came rapidly. I only smiled faintly, replying, "The truth will speak for itself." In the courtroom, every seat was filled. Julia entered in a black dress, hair neatly tied, her face carefully made up, but unable to hide her exhaustion. David sat behind her, his eyes avoiding mine. I glanced at my son briefly, but he kept his head bowed. The judge entered, gavel striking, voice commanding. "The trial begins." Julia's lawyer stood first, exuding confidence. "Your Honor, the plaintiff, Miss Clara Mitchell, is a 71-year-old woman. At this age, her memory has declined, making her susceptible to manipulation. Her neighbors and lawyer have exploited her paranoia to concoct a story that her daughter-in-law stole her recipe. In truth, Miss Mitchell once agreed to pass on the recipe, but now regrets it and seeks to ruin Julia Brooks, a talented young chef." Julia stood, tears in her eyes, but her voice clear. "I love her like a mother, but she's no longer lucid. I've seen her make mistakes while cooking, even forgetting spices. I only wanted to carry on the recipe to keep it alive, but now she's turned against me, to harm me." In the room, some shook their heads, others whispered. My heart ached, but Harris placed a hand on mine, signaling patience. It was our turn. Harris stepped forward, his voice booming. "Your Honor, this accusation is a clumsy charade. We have witnesses, experts, forensic analysis, and video proving Julia Brooks stole the recipe, forged a signature, and deceived the Southern Flame restaurant chain." He gestured, and a handwriting expert stepped up, a middle-aged man presenting 2 sets of documents. I analyzed the signature on the contract Julia submitted. The result, it wasn't signed directly. It's a scanned copy, pasted from an old signature of Miss Mitchell's. Pixel traces show the copying process. Notably, it matches perfectly with a signature from an insurance form dated 1989. "This is clear forgery." Julia jumped up, shouting, "No, that signature is real. She signed it and forgot." The expert calmly replied, "If it's real, why do the signature's edges show pixel distortion, typical of pasting into a PDF? And the document's metadata shows it was created on a laptop registered to Julia Brooks. I have documentation from the manufacturer." Murmurs spread through the room. Julia's face turned purple, and she sank back into her seat. Harris called Dr. Martha Green, the culinary expert. She stood before the court, her voice steady, I've studied Clara Mitchell's jambalaya recipe since 1975. It has a unique culinary fingerprint, toasting thyme and dried chilies before adding them to the pot. A 3-2-2 ratio for the holy trinity of onions, celery, and bell peppers, and layered seasoning. The recipe Julia submitted to Southern Flame matches it exactly. This isn't inspiration or learning, it's deliberate copying. Julia forced a smile, interrupting, "Everyone uses onions, peppers, and celery in cooking. She's exaggerating." Martha looked directly at her. True, many use them, but the 3-2-2 ratio and toasting thyme and chilies are unique. And a 1975 newspaper documented this, with Clara Mitchell's name. It's undeniable. A wave of gasps filled the room, reporters snapping photos frantically. Julia paled. Harris took another step, his voice icy, and the final evidence. He activated the large screen. A video played, showing Julia in a cafe, unaware she was being recorded, laughing with a friend. That old hag was so naive. I just flattered her a bit, and she handed over all her secrets. No way I'd let that golden recipe die in her rundown food truck. The room erupted. Julia stood, screaming, "No, this is an invasion of privacy. It's not legal." The judge struck the gavel, his voice stern. "Order." He looked at Julia, then at me. I took a deep breath, staying calm. Harris concluded, "Your Honor, the evidence is overwhelming. Julia Brooks not only stole but forged, defrauded, and insulted a woman who dedicated her life to cuisine. We demand justice." The judge was silent for a long moment, then struck the gavel. After reviewing all evidence, the court finds Julia Brooks guilty of document forgery and commercial fraud. The contract with Southern Flame is void. The defendant must compensate all profits received and serve a 2-year suspended sentence. Clara Mitchell is recognized as the rightful creator and has her honor restored. The room exploded in applause. I sat there, tears streaming, but this time from joy. Julia collapsed into her chair, face pale, sobbing, but no one paid her mind. David kept his head down, shoulders shaking, still unable to meet my eyes. As I stepped outside, reporters swarmed. "Miss Mitchell, do you have anything to say?" I smiled, my voice calm but firm. "True love for cuisine cannot be stolen. Justice may come late, but it always arrives. And today, justice has won." Flashes blazed relentlessly. I knew from now on, my name would not only be tied to jambalaya, but to a truth. No one could steal Clara Mitchell's honor without paying a price. When the judge's gavel struck, affirming my victory, I knew an old chapter had closed. But I also understood that victory wasn't just for sitting back and enjoying the compensation Julia had to pay. A sum so large it stunned the press was an opportunity to do something truly meaningful. I didn't want to spend it on lavish trips or a new house. I'd lived my life simply, and I knew the true value of money came from using it to create change. One morning, while cooking jambalaya in the food truck, I saw poor children standing outside the window, sniffing the rich aroma, their eyes sparkling. They didn't dare come closer, just stood afar, whispering to each other. My heart sank. I remembered my own childhood, a poor girl in New Orleans, dreaming of a full meal, and then it hit me. This was what I had to do. So I decided I'd use all the settlement money to establish the Clara Mitchell Culinary Academy, a place to teach cooking for free to poor children, not to make them famous chefs, but to give them the belief that they, too, could create, could build a future from the smallest things. A grain of rice, a pinch of spice. On the Academy's opening day, I trembled as I cut the red ribbon. Julia wasn't there, nor was David, but around me were dozens of children in tiny aprons, eyes gleaming, clapping, and cheering. The press called it Clara Mitchell's most beautiful revenge, turning betrayal into a legacy for the community. I didn't call it revenge. I called it a new beginning. In the Academy's spacious kitchen, large pots simmered on the stoves, steam rising thickly. I walked among the tables, the kids chattering as they chopped onions, washed vegetables, stirred pots, laughing like little birds. One said, "Chef Clara, I've never cooked like this before." I patted their head, smiling. Just remember one thing, cooking isn't just for the stomach, but for the heart. I taught them to taste spices with their noses, to listen to the sizzle of hot oil, to be patient so the jambalaya cooked evenly, without rushing. I saw myself in their eyes, the longing to be recognized, loved, free to create. Some days, strangers visited the academy just to try the jambalaya cooked by poor kids. They were amazed that it tasted just like mine from the food truck. I only smiled, the recipe's the same, just flavored with children's laughter. On late nights, when everyone had left, I sat alone in the vast kitchen, watching the fire still flickering under the large jambalaya pot. I asked myself, was it worth it, Clara? Was it worth all the pain, betrayal, and trial to get here? The answer was always yes. I was no longer angry like before. Julia had lost everything, while I had found myself again. David still hadn't faced me directly, but I believed one day he'd realize that silent complicity was a deep wound, and he'd have to find his own way to heal. I no longer waited or begged for affection from anyone. I was writing a new page for my life. One afternoon, as the kids gathered around a simmering pot of jambalaya, they cheered as I scooped out hearty portions, the aroma filling the kitchen. I watched them laugh, their eyes sparkling under the afternoon sun streaming through the window. My heart suddenly glowed, warm as the first time I held my mother's cookbook. I stood there, breathing in the familiar spice scent, and whispered to myself, a recipe, like love, cannot be stolen. It only blossoms when shared, and justice, like jambalaya, is only truly delicious when cooked slowly with enough fire. Outside, the children's laughter echoed, mingling with the rich aroma of jambalaya. I closed my eyes, knowing I had finally reclaimed everything myself, my honor, and my freedom. If Clara's story of jambalaya justice inspires you, hit subscribe to not miss more gripping tales. Thank you for joining us, and see you in the next video, where truth and justice always find their voice.